games, comics, anime. Codenamed Epic.
Hi, everybody. Hi. I'm Paula Angeles. I am the Director of Marketing and Community Outreach for Pacific Media Expo, and thank you for coming to the Alligence musical panel. So let me give you a really quick introduction of the folks who are up here. Let's start with Jay.
Do we care about her?
So Alligence is Jay Kuo's fourth musical. His composing career began at Stanford, where he wrote and produced Upwardly Mobile. Kuo's second musical, Insignificant Others, played in San Francisco and won a Bay Area Theater Critics Circle Award for Best Original Script. His third work, Worlds Apart, about star-crossed lovers in a cultural divide, performed both in San Francisco and in New York. In addition to composing, Kuo is a Broadway producer of Catch Me If You Can, American Idiot, and Slava's Snow Show. Our second panelist is Lorenzo Tioni. He has been part of the producing team of numerous productions on and off Broadway, which includes Slava's Snow Show, which was Tony nominated, American Idiot, which was also Tony nominated, Ellie in Catch Me If You Can, which got a Tony nomination also. As a producer of Alligence, Tioni brings a fresh and creative perspective to the challenges of theater production, drawing from his experience as startup entrepreneur and social media and marketing expert. And of course, our third person on our table is George Takei. I could read you his bio, but it's quite long. So, it's very long. He has a page for himself. Do you guys want me to read it? Yeah. Oh, you know? Okay. Yep. And of course, last but not least, we have Paul Nakauchi, who lent his voice to many popular video games. So, you know, gamers.
Like what game?
I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Including Cars 2, the video game, Tomb Raider 7, Call of Duty World at War. He was also the voice of Janfu in Dead or Alive Dimensions, and Mr. Nakauchi has numerous theater, TV, and movie credits, including The King and I, Miss Saigon, ER, The Young and the Restless, Saturday Night Live, The Great Race, and The Next Race. And he also does voices in anime as well. So let me go ahead and start asking some of the questions. Actually, this is for Mr. Takei. How does your own experience growing up in an internment camp affect your work in Alligence?
It affects me in a very profound way. My life has been defined by the internment, packing. And the next morning they dressed me, and I was in the living room, and they were dressing my younger brother and baby sister. And I was looking out the living room window when I saw two soldiers come marching up our driveway. They had bayonets on their rifle, shining in the sunlight. They stomped up to our front door, banged on the door, and when my father answered, they ordered us out. And we picked up the luggage that we were allowed to carry, and we were put on a truck. And I saw a group of people milling around across the street from our house. I remember that, and when I was a teenager, I asked my father, what was that all about? And he explained that they were vultures, as he put it. They were looters waiting for us to be taken away, and they looted our home once we drove away. That experience is seared in my memory, although I was a 5-year-old child. I do remember that. And then from there we were taken to Santa Anita Racetrack, the horse stables of Santa Anita Racetrack. And we were told that we were going to sleep in a horse stall. For me, as a child, it was kind of exciting to sleep where the horses sleep. But as an adult, I thought back on how my parents must have felt to leave our 2-bedroom home and to be crowded into a narrow, smelly horse stall. How degraded they must have felt, how humiliating. And that internment experience, as a child, the real time that I spent in the internment camp, for me was actually, to be very honest, a fun experience. You know, because children adjust amazingly to the most unnatural kind of situation. As long as you have 2 parents who love you and establish some kind of stability in the family. I do remember the barbed wire fence that confined us. I remember the sentry towers with the machine guns pointed at us. And I remember when I made night runs from our barrack to the latrine, searchlights followed. I remember going with my father to bathe in a mass shower. Those are memories I have, but they were part of the normality, the routine of being confined in those barbed wire camps. I also remember starting school. We were taken to a camp in the swamps of Arkansas, and we learned how to recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry tower right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "with liberty and justice for all." Those are my childhood memories, memories of an innocent child. But as I grew up and began to understand what it was all about, I started to talk with my father especially, but with other adults, and got a better understanding of what that experience was, how unconstitutional it was. In our system, when you're arrested, you have the right to know why you're being arrested. And then you have the right to know, to challenge those charges in a court of law. And then when you're found guilty of that, you're imprisoned. In our case, there were no charges, no trial, no due process, which is the pillar of our justice system. Simply because we happened to look like the people who bombed Pearl Harbor, we were incarcerated for the duration of the war. But my father didn't want us to grow up bitter about that experience, because he believed in the American democratic system. He told us that both the strength and the weakness of American democracy is in the fact that it's a true people's democracy. And it can be as great as a people can be, but it's also as fallible as people are. And when Pearl Harbor was bombed, the nation was swept up in war hysteria. And politicians picked up on that and began the campaign of get rid of the Japs. We were American citizens. My mother was born in Sacramento. My father was born in Japan, but he came to, his father brought him to San Francisco when he was a boy, and he was raised and educated as a San Franciscan. He felt very American. I was born here in Los Angeles, where my parents met. And so, you know, we're Americans, but it gave me an understanding of how important it is in our kind of democracy, which is dependent on good people being engaged in the process. How important it is for us, as we fancy ourselves good people, to be actively engaged in the political process. to hold democracy's feet to the fire and not let the hysteria of the times take over. And so the internment experience has shaped my life, and that's why I've been an activist throughout my life. I was involved in the civil rights movement. I marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. I was involved in the campaign to get redress for the unconstitutional incarceration of Japanese Americans. And I'm gay, and I came out in 2005. And I've been active in the struggle to get equality for lesbians, gays, bisexual, and transgender people. It's a part of what it means to be a responsible American citizen. I've been active in political campaigns for politicians as well as for issues. So the internment has shaped who I am.
And the next question is for Jay and Lorenzo. How did the idea of doing a musical set during the internment originate?
It's actually a really fun story. Lorenzo and I are producing and writing partners, and for about 6 months I've been looking for the story, the great story that would get us inspired and want to work hard on our next show. And on our very first scouting trip to New York, we were sitting in a theater, an off-Broadway theater, and I hear two people talking behind me. One of them is talking like this.
I'm paying attention.
She's paying attention.
I'm paying attention.
So I turned around because I recognized the voice, and
You stopped.
I stopped in mid-sentence, and
Something must have happened for Jay to stop talking. So I turned around. It was like, wait, George Takei?
So we met George in an off-Broadway theater, and we just exchanged niceties and talked about some theater. And sort of left it to that. We had some mutual friends, and it was fun running into him. But the next day, Lorenzo and I were at another theater, watching In the Heights. And who should be in our row but George Takei.
And it was the first comment George had was, are you guys stalking us?
So it was surprising to us to see George and Brad again 2 days in a row. George was my hero growing up. You know, I was a big Star Trek fan, and he was the only Asian guy on TV. So I looked up to him tremendously, and I thought it was really great to run into him twice. Well, during In the Heights, there's this song that's sung by the father called Inutil. He's singing, he's a Cubano, and he's singing about his daughter and how useless he feels to help Puerto Rican. How useless he feels to help her in her path. And George was very affected and very moved by that song, and he was wiping away tears. And so I asked him at an intermission, I said, Mr. Takei, because I called him Mr. Takei back then, and I said, Mr. Takei, I'm so curious, why did that song move you so? And he began to tell us the story of growing up in the internment camps and how his own father felt helpless to help their family.
All of us at intermission, there was like a little crowd all around George listening for what you're going to say.
And I kept looking at Lorenzo.
And we were like, you're thinking what I'm thinking, right?
Right, so we said, this is going to sound crazy, but I write musical theater and we're producing musical theater, and we think that the story that you just told would be a terrific inspiration for the next show that we want to work on. So we're going to send you a storyline and a title song. And
no, I can't say, I can't imagine what Brad and George must have thought at that time. It was like, who are these two people? I'm sure, or whatever. But they, for whatever reason, trusted us enough to give us their email address. And we were on a trip. We actually spent the rest of the couple next weeks sort of like reading, and we read George's autobiography, and we started reading all this stuff. And a few weeks later, we did send George the title song, a title, and kind of an idea of a sketch of what we wanted to do, and said, well, you don't really know us, but we are going to work on this, and we think you should be involved. And somehow he said yes.
And so with George signed on, a few months later, we signed Lea Salonga to the project. And if you don't know Lea Salonga, she was the original Miss Saigon on Broadway. She's also the voice of Mulan in the
She was the one who sang the original A Whole New World.
Yeah, and also she's the voice of Jasmine in Aladdin. So she's known for her Disney work, but she's got one of the best voices on the planet. So these two superstar Asian Americans are headlining Alligence now, which is going to open on Broadway probably year and a half or 2 years ago.
Yeah, and alongside with an incredible cast, of which Paul is here with us as well. And Paul, we'll get to that, but Paul plays George's father. Now, if someone is wondering how that might
George goes back in time. But the story takes place in the present, and then there's a flashback to the past. So, and the younger George is played by Taylor Young.
Who watches Glee here? Anybody?
Yeah, so he's the Asian, head of the Warblers. He's the Asian Warbler on Glee. And one of the
amazing,
glorious
amazing
voices on...
incredible actor.
He's currently headlining Godspell in New York City.
Broadway.
Yeah, so on Broadway. But so we're very fortunate to have this amazing cast and to have assembled the most talented Asian actors in the planet together in one show. So
yes.
Headline by George.
So that's it. That's the story of how Alligence was born.
As they said, that's the way we met. And we started email correspondence. And 2 weeks after we began that correspondence, Jay sent me the song that he had written a song for the father character. And that song was the title song, Alligence. And that song is sung by Paul here. And it is a powerful and deeply moving song. And I must say, your performance, Paul, reminds me of my father. You're a fantastic actor and a singer.
Actually, for Jay and Lorenzo again, actually, this leads to the next question. Why a musical instead of a play?
So, as a musical theater writer, I feel sometimes that there are things that can't be expressed merely in words, that the emotions run so high that you just have to sing them. And it's the philosophy behind opera, it's the philosophy behind great dancing. It's not enough to just move, you must dance. It's not enough to just talk, you must sing. And so it's the one thing I think that really separates us from other creatures, our ability to really imagine and to inspire and to be greater than we are in our everyday. And so that's why I work in the medium of musical theater, and it's a great American tradition. It's really invented here in America, this notion of musical theater.
And to me, it's even sort of peculiar that a question like that should be asked, and it is asked of us a lot. Because if you think about it, it sort of starts from the assumption, as if that you can't have a musical about a serious theme, or that every musical has to be sort of a happy song and dance 42nd Street. But when you actually really look at American musical theater and you look at the most poignant, most sort of impactful and beloved musicals, many of them are about serious themes. You know, from West Side Story, which is really Romeo and Juliet and a tragedy, to Miss Saigon, to Les Miserables. I mean, it's just one after the other. So it's kind of interesting. People kind of make that immediate assumption, but then if you stop and think about it, it is the way in which stories reach the widest audience and affect them emotionally the most.
Oh, and actually, this is for Mr. Takei. How is acting for the stage very different than acting in front of the cameras?
Well, it is two different ways of acting. The camera affords you the opportunity to be much more internal. The camera comes real up close, and just maybe the glint in the eyes will capture an emotion. On stage, the audience is away from you, and so and they might be in the balconies much further up. So you have to physicalize what the emotion is. Each has its own pluses and minuses. In film acting, you have the opportunity to have not only take one, but take two, and if it's not perfect, take 3 and 4 and 5 and so on. With the stage, it's that first take that the audience sees. And so you've got to make that absolutely perfect. In movies, you have to wait months, maybe sometimes, you know, a year and a half before you see the result of your work, when you've almost kind of forgotten about it, moved on to other projects. In the theater, you get that immediate gasp, or that laugh, or that sob, which we will get in Alligence. And, of course, that applause. And ideally, the standing applause. And that's what gratifies an actor, that immediate connection with an audience's emotion. That's what makes it so fulfilling, and you feel like you're really relating to an audience. So each has its pluses and minuses, but I must say my preference is the theater.
Most film actors, when they try and do stage, have trouble with projecting their voice. Well, George doesn't.
Thank you.
And of course, in Alligence, Lea Salonga is also there. She is definitely one of the best-known Asian Pacific Islander actresses in stage right now. How was it like working with her? How was she? What does she like to work with, Mr. Takei?
Well, me. Well, I saw Lea too first in Miss Saigon in London, and she was thrilling on stage. What a glorious voice she has, and so moving. She's a wonderful actress as well. But when I started working with her, well, the first time I met her was in our own living room. Jay wanted to work on some of the music, and we have a piano in our living room. So he invited Lea to come over and work with us. And she said, "It's so cool to be in Sulu's living room." She is so down to earth, and we really got to know each other well, in fact intimately. When we did the workshop production this past summer, we shared spaces in our dressing room, and you know, we take our shirt off when you're changing or getting made up. And Lea's sitting next to me, and when I took my shirt off, she turns around and she says, "Look, everybody, you can count the six-packs on George's stomach," and she points them out. That's how intimate she will be. She's a very down-to-earth, earthy lady.
That's amazing. And this question is for Mr. Paul Nakauchi. You played a father in the show, Tatsuo Umura. What aspects of your own personal experience do you bring to this role?
Well, like George, my parents were interned during World War II, so I am the son of concentration camp survivors. So I do bring all of what George had talked about to my particular role, because children of concentration camp survivors also were very affected by it. You know, that we had, I knew about it ever since I was a child, and it affected my parents psychologically, and they pass it on to your children. I mean, it's much kind of like Holocaust survivors. So, but I love working with George. George is so gracious and so wonderful. And having watched him, I actually watched the original series on television, not the reruns, but it was in prime time, So he was a major influence on me, and I think most Asian Americans at the time, because he was really one of the very few Asian American faces on television and in film. And so I feel very thrilled to be working with George and having remembered all of his episodes. I mean, I can still see them running in my mind. Like that. But anyway, we were talking in the green room that I had forgotten, but I had actually done a little guest spot on Star Trek: The Next Generation with Richard Beamer. We had a little scene together, and I was playing a Tigerian soldier, and I was like this reptile, thing. But so we also share that in common as well as in terms of I'm being his father. We have that one little thing in common with Star Trek.
Well, if you saw Star Trek in the original, you are old enough to play my father. Would you believe Star Trek is celebrating its 45th anniversary this year? 45 years old. I think that's before some of your parents were born.
Probably true.
Actually, my parents were born before it came out.
Before Star Trek came out in 1966.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you're pretty old.
So, thank you. And so, really quickly, actually, for Jay and Lorenzo, what makes Alligence different from other Asian-themed shows, like, Flower Drum Song?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, this will be the first Asian American show actually written and directed by Asian Americans. It's kind of strange when you think about it. All of the other shows were written by white people. So they got it kind of right, but they got it really wrong.
And some of the Asian characters in some of those shows were played by white people.
Right. So this is the first truly organic Asian American musical, and it tells a really important Asian American story that we can all be proud of and make sure that everyone remembers and understands.
Director is Japanese Canadian. His parents, his father was interned. Japanese Canadians were also put in camps, and people don't know. So there's like a sort of a theme of personal experience and connection from this entire team that goes to the core of the show.
And we just a little plug. We're on Facebook, and we've got flyers up here. You can with QR codes that you can scan to join our Facebook fan page. We have one of the largest Facebook fan pages already of any musical because of the iconic presence of George Takei and Lea Salaga. And so the anticipation behind this is huge. Now you're all very lucky if you're in this area because a year from now, less than a year from now, it's going to be opening in San Diego first.
George and Leia, it's going to open at the old location.
We'll be definitely looking forward to that one. So actually, the question goes back to Paul Nakoji. Your wife is played by Sala Iwamatsu, the daughter of legendary Mako Iwamatsu, and he is a very, he's Tony nominated and Oscar nominated as well.
The first
That's right, so he's a legend.
He was nominated for Sand Pebbles.
Yeah, and so how has your interaction been, and how do you find working with her and other members of your cast?
This was my first opportunity to work with Sala. I mean, we had always sort of crossed paths. She had done Miss Saigon, and I had done Miss Saigon, but we had never actually worked together. So this was the first show where I had the opportunity to do that with. And it's so interesting because Mako is such a iconic figure in the whole Asian American acting community, and she's his daughter, and talking to her, it would be interesting to hear her stories of Mako, because here she is, the actress daughter, and her father is this, Academy Award nominated, actor, and how she would, be a little bit apprehensive of him coming to her show and everything. But she's a wonderful, wonderful actress, and if you guys have an opportunity to see the show, she brings so much, to the role, and I just feel so fortunate to have had her be playing my wife.
It's a very special cast with very amazingly sort of coincidental connections between them. Our other actor, which we mentioned before, Telly Leung, who plays young George, young Sin, in the show, told us later on that Mako was his inspiration, and he actually wrote, when Mako was about to pass away, he wrote a letter and gave it to Sala to read to Mako on his deathbed about how much Telly had been inspired and motivated by Mako.
I had actually met Mako once. I had done a table read for the movie Last Samurai, and so I got to read one of the roles with him. The guy, the role that I read was Ken Watanabe's role, But so I met him, and I actually read with him. So that was a big thrill for me, and it was very sort of disarming. Very, very, very interesting man. So.
Sala is a very unusual name, and I asked her, how did you get that name Sala? And she told me that she was really supposed to be named Sarah, S-A-R-A, but her parents kept calling her Sala because of the accent. And so she decided to spell it the way her parents called her. So that's how the name Sala came about. It's a very original, singular name.
That's a good one. Actually, so let's go back to Mr. Takei, and you have spoken very highly of this project in other interviews. So what makes this project special to you other than, of course, it speaks to your experience?
To tell the story of the internment is something of a life mission of mine. I think the failure of our democracy under those hysterical times has an important lesson for all Americans, because it happened to our United States Constitution. Yes, we were the ones that were imprisoned, but what was really the victim was our Constitution. And we learned from that how fragile our Constitution is. As Americans, we all need to know that we have a responsibility to make our Constitution true and to make it a better democracy. And so telling this story is, we founded the Japanese American National Museum here in Los Angeles, but it's a national museum, and we send our exhibits throughout the country. The exhibits travel. And I've been speaking at colleges and some high schools on the internment experience to people. It has been a personal mission of mine. But the most powerful way to reach people is not just through education, the intellectual, but through the heart, combined with the mind, to understand the story as human beings. And a musical is a powerful way of connecting with audiences. And to tell that story, not just in little theaters or in high school auditoriums, but on the most important, the biggest stage in American theater, Broadway. And so we have the opportunity to do that with this. Alligence is an important story. It's a powerful drama. And the music that Jay has created is glorious. And I'm really impressed by his fluency in so many different musical languages. The internment happened in the 1940s, and he captures the sound, the rhythm, and the feel of the 1940s popular songs, like the Andrews Sisters songs. He also captures the sound of Japanese folk music. And of course, it's Broadway theater, so glorious love songs, heartbreaking love songs, and some wonderful, lively, up Broadway numbers, amusing numbers. It's Broadway, and it connects with the heart and the mind together. And that's why I think it's so important to tell this story on Broadway.
And what's more, this is for Jay and Lorenzo, and I know you talked about how your cast was built, but yeah, how did you go about getting your cast other than the chance meeting?
Well, so Jay talked about the first time that we got Leia, and we had reached out to Leia through sort of the channels that you would imagine, you would reach an actor through, her agent, and people had worked with her. But the thing that probably we just lucked out, we didn't know how much of a Star Trek fan she is. and when she got the script, it was like, wait a second, do I get to work with Sulu? So we probably heard that she was going to join the project from her Twitter stream.
Right, Leia is notorious for pretty much turning down every project that passes her desk. As you can imagine, she gets a lot of offers, and so we didn't have a lot of hopes to to get her, and it was really the fact that George was involved, I think. Also because I knew a lot of her friends on Facebook, and I made them like send her Facebook messages. Because I've worked with a lot of Asian Americans who've worked with her, and it's a tight community, and we watch out for our own. Now, for this cast of 23 people, we had 4 weeks of auditions on both coasts of the United States, and so we have an incredible, we saw hundreds of people, incredible cast, and so when you all get to see it in San Diego, you'll see assembled probably the most glorious set of voices and actors that Asian America has to offer.
And so how much is Alligence based on true events for Jay and
what happened when Jay and I set out to write the story for Alligence was that, as Jay talked about, we were inspired by the things that George had told us about his experience. But what started at that moment was a period of a lot of research and a lot of reading and a lot of reading up on what had happened. And there's quite a bit of true historically accurate events that sort of underlie the story of Alligence. But ultimately, the story of Alligence is about a family, and a family in which we wanted the widest possible audience to be able to identify with, to recognize themselves in their struggles and their relationships and their problems and their triumphs. And so, in that sense, it's a story about a true story, true history, part of American history, but about a family and relationships and themes that apply to everybody. So it's no one's particular story, but there are definitely many, many aspects of the story that are historically accurate and that happened. And that makes the tragedy of what happened even more poignant in the show.
Just to add to that, this is, I think, one of the few musicals we found where the guys really like it, because a lot of guys say, musical, I don't want to see a musical, but then this is about history and conflict and war and patriotism and honor. And George brings so much to the character that people get really wrapped up in it. And at the end of the musical, you look around and all the guys are crying. It's really kind of funny to see the women are like, "What are you doing?" it's very inclusive that way.
And actually, this question goes for Paul Nakauchi. And you played apparently iconic roles such as the King in The King and I.
Yes.
And what makes this role of Tatsuo Omura very special in your eyes?
Well, for me it's special because The King and I, which is a wonderful role, and actually it's one up until now, it's one of the few roles for an Asian American male, that was a strong, powerful character. And I've been very fortunate in my career to have played that role in London with Elaine Page. But I feel so fortunate to be playing this role because this is another very strong character who believes, who has very, very strong beliefs and conveys a sense of honor and dignity, to his children. And for an Asian American male actor, in theater today, this is like one of 2 or 3 roles that, comes your way. And so I feel very, very lucky that I'm part of this team and of this extremely talented team. And to be able to bring, what I have experienced and some of, who I am to the role. So I look forward to it with so much anticipation, to see how it all unfolds.
And actually, this question is also for Mr. Nakauchi again. And how has it been as an Asian actor on Broadway and the West End? What obstacles did you have to overcome?
Well, I don't think it's there. The truth of the matter is that there just aren't a lot of roles out there. So that's just a fact. For myself, I've been very lucky and I've been fortunate in actually doing a couple of roles that are out there, and so, but it's a struggle, when I was in The King and I on Broadway, I had auditioned for a lot of the new musicals that were coming down the pike, and things have changed a lot. This was like 15 years ago, but foretelling some of the younger Asian American actors that are coming up. They have more opportunity because we as a society are seeing things more inclusively now, you know. Whereas even 15 years ago, things were limited basically to The King and I for Asian American performers, or Miss Saigon, or in Flower Drum Song, you know, in the musical theater realm. But that's why, again, I say I feel so incredibly fortunate to be a part of this program, because this is another musical that will add a whole new, you know, cast of people, a whole new vehicle for more talented Asian performers to come into these roles, as Miss Saigon did, because before Miss Saigon, you know, they said that they had trouble finding Asian American, you know, actors and actresses and singers. Well, because there's nothing out there for them to do. Now that when Miss Saigon came up and it was on Broadway and there have been so many national tours, you have a whole pool now of Asian American actors and actresses and singers, and, you know, wonderful, wonderful singers. I mean, look at all the wonderful Filipino singers that came from Miss Saigon. So it is getting better. It's slow process, like with all sort of race, sort of, you know, relations in America. Things take a much slower pace than we might actually like to have happen, you know. And sometimes it goes, you know, a person's career sort of like you get too old to do things that, you know. But here we are in 2011, and things for you, for all of you young people out there, I think there's a much brighter, you know, future ahead.
As Paul said, we've made progress, but it's been very slow. And sometimes there are steps backwards as well. I'm sure all of you know Akira, the anime. You don't know? Well, it's a tremendously popular anime that takes place in post-apocalyptic Tokyo. And Warner Brothers bought the rights to that. And this was, I guess, about 6, 7, 8 months ago. They announced their casting ideas. They were talking about people like Justin Timberlake. And
sorry to interrupt, but they actually gave it a green light.
yes, I know. I was going to work up to the present, but give you a little history. They were casting it all with white actors. You know, it's post-apocalyptic. Well, if they want to change it, they should start with a clean slate. Have a whole new story. Why buy Akira and then change it completely, you know? And so there was a great wave of criticism and protest to that approach. Well, they retreated on that, and we thought that maybe we had communicated that they learned something. Right. You use what we have available now, the technology, Twitter and Facebook and so forth, and so the word has spread like wildfire, and Warner Brothers retreated on that. We thought they had learned from that, but now it's come back again, and as you point out, they're still insisting on going the same route. Interestingly, Leonardo DiCaprio, who's a young person, you know, and he would think young, but he's behind the project as one of the 3 or 4 producers. So Hollywood makes some progress, grudgingly more often than not, and we take a few steps backwards. And I think the Akira project seems to be indicating that step backwards. So, you know, we have to keep on keeping on, keep on pressing, keep on pushing these antiquated ways of thinking. They have a right to do something different if they, you know, if that's their concept. But then don't publicize it as Akira. Why pay tons of money to buy the rights when they're going to change it anyway? It'd be much more economical. Put that money into the production itself, rather than buying something and then changing. So I think the struggle continues. We've made some progress, but we also take a few steps backwards.
I think it's important to say too is that if you, as Asian Americans, and a lot of you are here in this audience, I think it's important to, if you want your story to be told, you have to write and tell your own story. And as you know, Jay is proving here on this panel, that you are going to be the most important person, to tell your story. So don't let what's going on in, Hollywood sort of dictate to you, the fact that what you have to offer is not valid or is not important, So, and I think all of you sitting here in this Asian American Conference is witness to the fact that yes, you are here and you want your voice is heard, and what you have to say counts.
If Alligence succeeds and Jay has his way, there will be a whole slew of new Asian American role written for American.
So don't give up on all that,
And the road company, and the Canadian company, and the London company.
So this is our last question, actually. So what is next for Alligence, and when are we going to get to see it?
So we kind of gave a preview of a little bit of that, but just to sort of tell you a little bit of what's happening, we, the process of building a Broadway musical is something that one doesn't necessarily imagine to be as long as it is, but Jay and I have been working on this project for now 2.5 years, and it's morphed and changed, and we've discovered what the show needed to be and wanted to be throughout each time that we got this cast together and discovered a new version for the show. And we just most recently worked with George and Paul and the rest of our cast this summer, did a workshop presentation production of this, and that's what propelled us towards our world premiere, which will happen in San Diego next year. So we're all going back into this development process throughout the fall and the spring, and we'll look at what new exciting changes and further development will go into the show before we open for the first time in front of an audience next year in San Diego. And then from there on, it'll move to Broadway. In the meanwhile, we plan to keep all of our fans and all the people that are interested in this project really involved and part of this process. So Jay mentioned it, our Facebook page, our Twitter stream, our website, alliancemusical.com, has a lot of content both on the process of building the show, interviews with the cast, just kind of like an inside look on it.
It also has a lot of George's blog now, right?
It does. Also, George is keeping a blog.
That blog, I think it's called That Blog is So Takei.
Yes. You can find it through his website or on the Alligence website. And there's also one of the things that we're doing that is really part of what we want to do with this show. It is, as I said, an entertaining, a sort of wide appeal show for people to connect with, but there is a lot of responsibility that we feel in telling the story, and there's a lot of the story of the Japanese American internment that we simply could not and would not go into as far as the story of the musical goes. But there is a lot of that material and a lot of that information that we're going to make available and accessible through our website. And a lot of that sort of, we hope that when people come and see the show, they will be inspired and become curious about learning more about what happened to Japanese Americans during what George described as the most egregious violation of our American Constitution.
And to that end, we're going to be having a program, I think beginning next year, called the Ambassador Program, which every fan can participate in. The more involved you become with the show, and the more you learn about it, the more you tell your friends about it, the more points you'll score on our Ambassador Program, and you can win tickets and backstage passes and all kinds of stuff. For the young people, that's really great because the ticket prices can be kind of high, but you can earn your way to tickets to New York and backstage with George and Leia and all of those things if you become an Alligence ambassador. So look for that program on our website.
So just go on the website if you're curious, and you'll find a way to sign up.
Today is Veterans Day, and there is another remarkable aspect to the internment. It's an amazing story. We were incarcerated because we were seen as an enemy. They called us enemy non-aliens. What is a non-alien? That's a citizen. They couldn't even call us citizens. They called us non-aliens. And yet, after a year in internment, the government realized that there was a wartime manpower shortage in the military. And so as suddenly as they picked us up, rounded us up, they opened up the United States Army for service by Japanese Americans. And the amazing thing is, thousands of young Japanese American men and women went from behind those barbed wires, put on the same uniform as that of the sentries that guarded over us, to serve in the U.S. Army. The women served in the WACS, the Women's Army Corps, and the men were put into a segregated unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. They went from behind imprisonment in American concentration camps to fight for this country, leaving their families behind those barbed wire fences. They were sent to Europe, and they fought with amazing, incredible courage and bravery on those bloody European battlefields. Many, many thousands of Japanese Americans perished on those battlefields. And they came back from the war as the most decorated unit of its size in the entire Second World War. They were greeted back to the United States on the White House lawn by President Harry Truman, who said to them, "You fought not only the enemy, but prejudice, and you won." In 2004, I made a pilgrimage back to the camp that we were imprisoned in Arkansas. Everything that I remembered about the camp had disappeared. The swamp had been drained, the forest had been chopped down, and it was miles and miles of cotton fields. The only evidence of an internment camp there was a cemetery. And the most prominent marker in that cemetery was a memorial to those young men who went from Camp Rower in southeast Arkansas to fight for this country and perished. I stood there by that memorial, and I felt so grateful to them and so humbled, and the poignance of the situation was so much that I lost it. Tears just flowed down my cheeks. It's an amazing story of Americanism, of patriotism, and belief in the fundamental ideals of the system. And it's to those remarkable young men, both the young men who died, as well as those that came back, some crippled, that made my America today, for me to be functioning as an actor, enjoying some success, that I owe to those amazing people. I know the price that was paid for my American citizenship, and that's what drives me to be as good a citizen as I can be. These are steps forward, and the sacrifices made by those amazing people is what makes this country the wonderful, beautiful country that it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to the interest of time, what we're going to do is, I know that you guys want to do the raffle. We will do it online at the PMX website or the Facebook page. So don't worry, we will make sure that you guys are taken care of. We will go ahead and we will do that, and we know who everybody is, so we will probably get an email. And we will actually go ahead and email the winner, and there should be 2 of you guys. And thank you very much to the producers and the cast of Alligence Musical. the Alligence flyer in your registration bag. So please do scan the QR code. Here, can we all fit? Okay, you know what? So I can do this. Okay, I can do this.
And Lorenzo's tall.
Okay. Okay, so this is for Sean. Sean, are you done?
Sean, did you get it?
Did you get it, Sean?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, yeah, we'll do a couple more and then we should.
Sorry, Mike. I'm going to place this here, okay?
Let me know when you're ready, Sean. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Good.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.
So we're staying?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm fine. I can just record like this.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll make this a really quick press panel since actually many of the items that that I'm sure you are going to ask has been answered at the panel. So we are going to go ahead and open it up to questions from the press, and we'll have about 30 minutes.
Your question?
One at a time.
Why do an opening statement? Do an opening statement. Why are you here today?
Sure. Okay, so my name is Lorenzo Tione. I'm with Jay, one of the co-creators and producers of Alligence. Alligence is a new original Broadway musical, Broadway-bound musical, which has been in development for the last few years, and that stars, amongst others, George Takei, who's here with us, and Paul Nakauchi, as well as Lea Salonga, and an incredible other set of Asian American actors. The show is set to open next year at the Old Globe Theater in San Diego before heading to Broadway the following season. And it's an original story that deals with a chapter of American history that is very much untold and undiscovered, which is the internment of Japanese Americans during the end of World War II after Pearl Harbor. We are here to talk with people about this project, tell them about it, and sort of just be able to answer whatever questions about this project and its genesis and its importance in our minds for the American public and the world. Yes?
Yeah. At the last part of the previous panel, you mentioned that you're going to start with San Diego for the premiere, and then you're going to move to Broadway. And as LA residents, just wondering, nothing wrong with San Diego, but I'm just wondering the omission of LA, Los Angeles premiere, and will Alligence ever play in the LA County area?
So I can absolutely tell you that we are looking forward to a production that will open in Los Angeles, be it a touring production or a sit-down production in Los Angeles. Most shows, the vast majority of shows that are in development before they head to Broadway, they pick one market, one regional market to actually open and test the show before they can go to Broadway. Once the show opens on Broadway, is reviewed and has an audience there, if, as we all hope, Alligence is successful, many other productions will be born, and as well as touring production, which will touch Los Angeles, or a sit-down production like it has happened with shows like Wicked.
But we do have a strong Los Angeles connection, not only because of George's connection here, but our very first workshop production was held at the Japanese American National Museum in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. And so, and we just had a screening there last night. So we have a lot of connections here in Los Angeles, and have been very welcomed by both the Japanese American community and the theater community here.
Speechless.
It's just that good. Well, might as well plan it.
Sure.
Yeah. What has been the general reaction from the Japanese American community regarding Alligence? Do you want to answer?
Good question. internment has been the most destructive thing to happen to the Japanese American community. It fractured the community in many ways, and even divided many families. And so we tell that story very frankly, very forthrightly, and it was amazing for us to discover when we had screenings of the DVD of the readings that we had, how those fractures, which we thought had healed, still are very much alive. For example, the Japanese American Citizens League was very eager to be accepted by the rest of America, and they became the agents of cooperation with the internment, which turned another segment of the Japanese American community off on the JACL. Those of you who may know something about the internment period, JACL people were called either jackals, JACL, Japanese American Citizens League. The initials JACL could be pronounced jackal when you pronounce that, or inu, the Japanese word for dog. And there were beatings, there were riots, there were violence, violent acts committed. Families were divided by the loyalty questionnaire. So it was a very destructive event. And when we had these various readings and screenings of readings throughout the country, particularly on the West Coast, thank you, those fractures were reopened. So yes, indeed, it was something that has revealed some of the realities of 70 years ago today. In a few months, on February 19th, as a matter of fact, will mark the 70th anniversary of the signing of Executive Order 9066, signed by President Roosevelt, which ordered the imprisonment of Japanese Americans. So it's a very timely story, and certainly one told with the power of music as well as the force of the dramatic story.
It's been interesting. We've actually witnessed arguments break out in the hallways during intermission for issues that were settled decades ago, but in fact simmered in the community for some time. So this is not an easy story for me to tell, because as Mr. Takei said, it really split families along lines of, we say, along allegiance lines. Where does your allegiance lie? With the country that imprisoned you, or and do you continue to serve it faithfully, and when it itself has failed to live up to its own values? And so that's one of the questions that the community still hasn't completely come to grips with. And so even today, this show stirs up a lot of those old emotions, and we see arguments break out in the hallways. But it's good. I think the discussion is good.
If the show can revitalize and bring a debate and a dialogue that for years has just been tried to be swept under the rug, that will actually create more awareness, more understanding, and ultimately will increase the likelihood that as a nation and as a people we don't make the same mistakes again.
That discussion that this will stimulate, I think, will be a real contribution, because the internment was so painful, and the fracturing and the hate that was generated by that was so hurtful, that many people, many adults that experienced the internment never talked about it since then. And so the children of the survivors of the internment know very little about that aspect of the story. They know that their parents or their uncles or their grandparents were in prison, but they don't know the destructiveness of it. So this story, by approaching that issue forthrightly, will inform and educate a whole generation of Japanese Americans who know very little about the truth of internment. And that's the important, this is important for all of America. As I said earlier, it was our Constitution that was violated. But it's also going to be a revelation for young Japanese Americans who know very little about the reality of what the internment did to their families.
Actually, in that same light, my question is, Mr. Takei, do people, do your family members, and actually for Mr. Nakauchi also, do members of your family openly talk about this? Have the years actually allowed them to talk about this, or is this still something that they don't wish to talk about?
Well, my parents are gone now, but I was very fortunate in the father I had, because he not only discussed it, but he was something of a philosopher, and he believed in the fundamental ideals of American democracy. He put it in that context in my discussions as a teenager with my father. And as I quoted him in the previous session, he said both the strength and the weakness of American democracy is in the fact that it is a true people's democracy. And it can be as great as the people can be, but it's also as fallible as people are. And the people failed the ideals of democracy during those hysterical times when racism and war hysteria swept the country. So I was very fortunate in that. But I've shared this with Lorenzo and Jay. The Japanese American National Museum has one gallery that deals with the internment story. And what I love to do is roam around the museum when it's kind of on the quiet side. And I came across a family group, an old man, a middle-aged man, and two young preteen boys, about 9 and 10 or 11. And they were going through that internment exhibit. And as it turned out, the kids were the grandchildren of the old man. They were saying, "Grandpa, you were there? Grandpa, how did you feel? Grandpa, what did you do about it?" And Grandpa was sharing his thoughts, his feelings with his grandchildren. And the middle-aged man, obviously the father of the boys, said, "Gee, Dad, I never knew that. Gee, Dad, you never told me that." Something that the old man couldn't share with his own son, now with the passage of time, and to be in that setting of a very fine, handsome museum gallery, felt comfortable enough to share for the first time with his grandchildren something he had not shared with his own son. So that's been one of the legacies of the internment. The Japanese American generation that experienced internment very infrequently shared the full story with their children.
Yeah, my parents, my parents talked about it, but they never really, it was always just sort of factual, they talked about events going into the camps, and and I think what they left out a lot of times was how they felt about it, what was really going on about, because I think that was much harder to express, the anger, the outrage, and any kind of the resentment. And over the years, I think they suppressed a lot of that, and it just sort of became just into their sort of like memory. But what this show does is it allows the feelings to come out through the music, and I think that's the wonderful thing about this show, is that all the feelings that were suppressed by the Japanese Americans, in this musical, through the music, it allows those feelings to come out, and you hear all these people weeping, you hear, not just Japanese Americans, but you hear, all these people connecting with the relevance of the story. And it has so much relevance in terms of not just Japanese Americans, but what is it to be an American in this country? Is it, you know, are you all continually identified with the country of your ethnic origin, you know, or are we all Americans even in spite of, you know, what our countries of ethnic origin are? And this, you know, musical brings up that question, you know, and I think, so that's what many people will take out of this. So it's not just a Japanese American experience, it's a universal experience, and I think that's the most important thing about this musical, you know, because it's easy to sort of like just pinpoint and isolate one group of people, but the trick is to, you know, include everyone, so everyone can understand on a feeling human perspective, you know, what happened.
Any other questions?
Oh yes, I have one. I've been watching on YouTube that George has been doing a series of parodies of various musicals. And my question is would you be willing to do more of them again? And if so, which musicals would you love to film?
Well, those parodies called Road to Broadway is essentially paving the road for Alligence. We want to get the word out about Alligence. And so, you know, there's Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
So George really wants to be in drag.
Well, I did that already at Sister Act.
Sister Mary Teriyaki.
Sunset Boulevard.
You mean play the young writer?
Think more of Norma Desmond.
So we haven't selected one yet, but yes, the road to Broadway is paved with many spoofs.
Yay.
Yeah, I was going to ask whether you see any parallels with the internment with kind of today, the treatment of Muslim Americans.
Yeah, I mean, even knowing ahead of time the story we were going to tell, of course, the fact that the story was so relevant with respect to things that this country had done, was getting close to have done, constantly on the fear and on the verge of potentially doing. But we don't want to sort of kind of hammer that on the head. It's not like we try to be cautionary or, you know, try to draw that peril. It's so poignant that we heard it from people, you know, seeing early versions of the show. This is so incredibly actual, and this, you know, it's a very, very important story to tell, because it will have the power, if nothing else, to sort of have this story be known and top of mind, even for people that may actually not know. You would be surprised how many people we have encountered along the way that actually did not know that America had imprisoned its own citizens because of the way they looked.
There's a moment in the show early on where, I mean, an earlier version was the day of Pearl Harbor, when the people are hearing it for the first time, and their entire lives change on a dime. Suddenly, you're the enemy. And
The day that changed everything.
Muslim Americans who have seen the show come up and say, you know, that's how I felt on 9/11. And so we understand that there's a historical context to this and a historical parallel that can be drawn to today, not only in that story, but also in the love story, and there's a forbidden love story between the young version of George, young Sam, and the daughter of the internment administrator, and who's white. And in 1942 in Wyoming, you could not intermarry if you were white. And so the father says, this is against God's laws and man's. And people who are gay have seen that and said, and drawn a parallel to their own situation today.
And the mother is telling the daughter, just pretend these feelings aren't there, they'll go away. You know,
Right.
why would you make your life difficult for yourself?
So there are many moments in the show where you feel like the applicability of our modern questions remains, and that maybe we haven't learned as much as we should have from that experience, or maybe we're all still learning. And so we like to think that this show has a lot of current application to today's questions.
When 9/11 happened, Japanese Americans immediately knew what might be happening to Arab Americans. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Japanese American National Museum, and at that time in 2001, I was the chairman of the board. And we organized immediately a candlelight ceremony in the courtyard, in the plaza of the Japanese American National Museum. And we invited leaders of the Arab American community to join us. And because the museum happens to be 3 blocks away from City Hall, that candlelight ceremony turned into a candlelight march to City Hall and back. A little over a month after 9/11, we organized a symposium in the Great Hall of the Japanese American National Museum. And we invited a leader from the Japanese American community, an older leader who remembered the experience as an adult, and a leader from the Arab American community. We had the executive director of the Human Relations Commission of the County of Los Angeles. We had the executive director of the ACLU, and we extended an invitation, or also the Sheriff's Department, and we extended an invitation to the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to join us. The FBI was the only group to demur, but we had that symposium moderated by Kitty Feldy of the NPR station, and it was broadcast on NPR. We were very conscious of what might happen to the Arab American community, and we organized to get that parallel story out as our effort to prevent the kind of wholesale political act that happened to Japanese Americans, and thank God it did not happen to Arab Americans, but there were an awful lot of, for example, the mosque issue near Ground Zero. I mean, that was a completely hysterical, racist reaction there. So we need to continually keep reminding America at times of great stress like that, how fallible we can be, and to try to temper that as we can. And certainly with Alligence, we will be contributing to that effort.
Along the same lines of the parallels between then and now, do you think with all we've learned and with how easy information is available with with the internet now, do you think the internment is something America is capable of doing again? Do you think people would stand by and let that happen a second time? I
would hope not, but you don't know what kind of event might happen. I'm not a foreseer of the future, but I am hopeful that we have learned. And certainly with after 9/11, there was no wholesale roundup and imprisonment of Arab Americans. There were certain leaders that were taken away, and their families knew nothing about where the father was taken, why he was taken, and 8 months later, he came back. So yes, something like that has happened after 9/11. So it's very difficult to predict what might be happening.
And certainly, there have been challenges to whether or not there have been violation of due process rights towards people that were detained throughout that period of time. But ultimately, what's certainly something that we've experienced is that even today, even with the sort of exchange of information and ease, sort of theoretical ease for these stories to be known, there still are an awful lot of people that don't even know that Japanese Americans were interned. As a matter of fact, in our early presentations, there were cast members who got the script from their agents and asked us, did this really happen? What happened? So it's actually, to some extent, California is one of the areas that sort of has the least of this problem. You know, it's part of our curriculum in schools and so on, but it is, you know, as George often mentions, as you move east of the Rockies, there is actually a lot of people that have never heard the story, and to the extent that they have heard it, they've heard a very simplified, very sort of, you know, neutral version of it. And I think, you know, we have the opportunity with a show that tells a moving, compelling story that stirs people's emotion to make this chapter of American history be top of mind for people, and ultimately it will be a service.
I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about why some of the other aspects of World War II have been covered in media, especially in the past, say, 20 or 30 years, but the internment issue hasn't really been talked about in movies or TV shows nearly as much as other aspects.
I can answer that to some extent. I think that this has been a difficult thing for Japanese Americans to discuss openly, and a lot of the stories have remained internal or unspoken. And part of it is because there was a lot of shame involved with the families when they were relocated, and they didn't want to dig up these old memories. And it isn't really until the Sansei, the third generation, that began asking a lot of questions that the older generations began to speak more openly. Also, a lot of these folks are in the twilight of their lives and are starting to realize that the story is an important one. And especially after 9/11, when they see that America can get hysterical again, I think that they see that there is a responsibility to make sure that we don't repeat these mistakes. And so often it takes sort of an outside look at a story to bring it to life. There have been in the past a couple of movies and a few books that have made it, but never has this story been told, certainly on the Broadway stage. And we feel that it's the appropriate place to tell it because of the epic sweep of the story, the stakes that are involved, and just the historical nature of it. You know, I'm not Japanese American, I'm Chinese American, but I consider
myself. Nor am
I. But I spent I'm a lawyer by training, and I spent my early years fighting for civil rights for Asian Americans, founding the Asian Law Journal, and doing things that, you know, among Asian Americans, and the story of the internment has always been the most important civil rights question that Asian Americans have had to face. At the same time, you know, we're still learning new things even about that story. Just a few months ago, the Solicitor General of the United States confessed that Army reports, Navy reports were buried and not presented to the Supreme Court when they heard the Karematsu case, and they had to apologize that all the stuff, that key evidence which should have been presented, which could have exonerated the defendant, was actually hidden by the Navy and buried. And so this stuff is we're still learning today of the mistakes of the past, and the story's not done, far from it. That's why, you know, we have these arguments occurring in the hallways. That's why just last week, or a few days ago, Congress awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor to 300 members of the
Gold medal.
The gold medal, yeah. The gold medal to survivors of the 442nd and 100th Battalion. So I think it's the right time for this story. I think that America has now matured to a point where the story can be told, and we can look back with honesty on these questions, and without political agenda, just looking for the truth, looking for human truth in the story. And so I think I'm very honored now that we have an opportunity to tell it.
Yeah, and there certainly have been, you know, other chapters of American history that were shameful, that have been dealt with in the arts and the movies and so on. And I think partly of your question about why not this part, and why, you know, with how much has been World War II, certainly part of that. You know, there's like Jay said, America is maturing to that point, but there's a lot of romantic rhetoric about World War II that is that moment in which America sort of stood up for, you know, the world's freedom, and it's been hard for us as a nation to actually take a step back and say, during that period when we were actually calling ourselves the liberators of the world, we were actually taking our own citizens and putting them in camps.
Just for the record, in answer to your question, in 1948, there was a movie done by MGM called Go for Broke, which is the motto of the 442nd. That movie starred Van Johnson. So that already gives you an idea of how it was treated. I did a movie in 1958 called From Hell to Eternity with Jeffrey Hunter and David Jansen and Vic Damone, and that dealt with the internment in a brief scene. And on television, the novel by Jane Bucketsky Houston titled Farewell to Manzanar was dramatized, but there were very few stories of the internment in movies and television.
Actually, a question for Jay. For those who are unfamiliar with the Fred Korematsu case, can you explain that?
Well, the Korematsu case was actually a series of cases, and they culminated in the Korematsu decision, which called to question whether Executive Order 9066 was itself unconstitutional, whether it was an unconstitutional extension of the executive power to round up citizens without due process in the name of defending the security of the nation. And it's a travesty in American jurisprudence because the Supreme Court held that the military had a rational basis for its actions, and basically ceded to the military the right to trample upon the constitutional guarantees of a people. And since then, it's interesting. One of the Supreme Court has an interesting checkered past with the whole internment question. One of the chief proponents of the internment in California was actually Earl Warren, who became the liberal Supreme Court Justice, Earl Warren. But during his time as Attorney General in California, he was calling upon the Japanese to be rounded up. And I think that experience, that he personally felt a lot of guilt over that experience, and that probably drove him to some of his more liberal decisions later. But the Korematsu cases stood sort of as a blight upon our whole legal system, and if the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, can agree that yes, it says you have these rights, but asterisk, not if the military says no. If that's the limit of what our Constitution is, then we have no true freedom. At any moment in time, that we could become a dictatorship ruled by our military or by one executive branch, and that's not how our society is structured. But the Supreme Court got it wrong. At least they're now acknowledging we got it wrong. That was wrong. We shouldn't have done that. But at the time, it was a huge setback for civil rights, and it's caused a lot of people to question the fundamental basis of our democracy and what the role of the judiciary should be. You know, they call them rights, to quote Rachel Maddow, they call them rights because they're not supposed to be voted away. And so, to me, you know, getting a chance to work on a show like Alligence, which highlights in a very dramatic way how these rights were trampled upon, it's truly a privilege. And to work with the great George Takei, who has spent his whole life sort of trying to inform America and inform our democracy on what went wrong and how we can prevent that from happening again. It's truly been an honor.
For full disclosure, I should tell you that as well as being a brilliant composer lyricist, Jay is still today a practicing attorney.
I like to talk.
Yeah, and write briefs as well.
So if nobody has any more questions? Last one.
Ultimately, what is the message that you hope America will get from your show? Well, everyone can answer.
Sure. It's and honestly, a story that moves people has to speak to an audience on many levels, and there are many stories within Alligence. And we've spent a lot of time today talking about the important message that sort of lies in the fact that the story of Alligence deals with the story of the Japanese-American internment. But as I hope you will see when you actually get to see the show, it actually tells the story of a family and their struggles their struggles as they diverge and they differ in their opinions and their views of the world, and they try to get each other to see sort of the way that they're seeing the world. And because of these stubbornness, and because of the mistakes they made, they drift apart. And it's the story of the opportunity that life gives you sometimes to make a wrong right and to fix a mistake that has been haunting you for a long time. Because if you let life give you and take that second opportunity, that second chance, then you can live the rest of your life happy and making peace. And that's ultimately actually the message that the story and the show carries, and that's why it's so moving and so important to so many people that have seen it.
Thank you very much, everybody.